This is 20 rare photos not appropriate for history books. I don't even know what to expect out of this one. Let's go.
Now, I've always been a bit of a history nerd myself, but I've got to tell you, when I first saw these photos, I was quite surprised myself. If you're a history buff, you might recognize some photos in this video though. Let's see, shall we? From the photo showing the tragic life of a beautiful woman to unbelievable secrets of the past world wars, here are 20 rare photos not appropriate for history books. Number 20. The story of Blanche Monier. This photo seems ordinary, just a photo of a beautiful woman. Who would have imagined she'd be unrecognizable just a few years later? Most people in history coveted those blessed with beauty, and this stands true to this day. But for Blanche, her charm was a curse that captivated her and chained her to a path of misery until her death. Blanche Monier, born in 1849, grew up in Poitiers, France. She was the daughter of a respected and affluent family. Her life appeared set on a comfortable path, but it turned into a horrific one. Blanche was a woman admired by many, and her beauty only became more noticeable as she grew up. In 1875, Blanche suddenly disappeared without a trace, and not a single soul knew where she went. Only one person knew where Blanche vanished to, and that person was supposedly the closest to her, her mother. For the next 25 years, Blanche's existence was confined to a small, dark, and windowless room within her family's home. During this time, the world outside continued to change. Wars were fought, governments rose and fell, and technological advancements reshaped society. Yet, Blanche Monier remained completely cut off from the world. The reasons behind her confinement remain a matter of speculation. Some reports suggest it was due to an unsanctioned love affair, while others claim it was to protect the family's social reputation. We may never know the full truth. However, many believe that Blanche's mother didn't approve of her relationship with a gentleman who didn't come from an affluent family. It wasn't until May 23, 1901, when authorities received an anonymous tip, that she was discovered. Acting on this information, they arrived at the Monier residence. What they found was nothing short of horrifying. Behind a padlocked door, they discovered Blanche Monier, emaciated and barely recognizable. She had aged significantly beyond her years, and her physical and mental health had deteriorated drastically during her confinement. Despite being in close quarters with her mother, it was clear that Blanche was abused and mistreated. Who would have thought that your own kin would do something unimaginably horrible? But perhaps, such is the nature of man.
Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button, and click the notification bell right now.
Imagine dating in that era back then. You thought parents were strict in this era? Think about back then.
Number 19. A photo shoot with spirits. This set of photos is quite unusual. While they may seem like edited photos with an intention to appear eerie, these were captured in the 1800s by none other than William Mumler, a gentleman known for his bizarre specialty, spirit photography. You'll notice bizarre figures next to each human subject in each photo. These are the alleged spirits summoned only through Mumler's photography. William Mumler was born in 1832 in Boston, Massachusetts. He began his career as a jewelry engraver and didn't initially have any aspirations in photography or the paranormal. And so, in the early 1860s, Mumler became a photographer. What finalized this decision was a self-portrait he took that featured a ghostly presence beside him. Mumler claimed that this was the spirit of his deceased cousin. At the time, many people quickly believed Mumler's statement, possibly fueled by people's desire to see their loved ones even in a photograph. Mumler's reputation grew, and he gained a significant following. However, not everyone was convinced of the authenticity of his photographs. Critics accused him of fraud and manipulation, suggesting that he used double exposure techniques to create the ghostly apparitions.
That's what I was thinking at first, especially when you see some of the photos with the spirit with their hands on the person's shoulder. I was like, so they posing for the picture too? Come on now.
His images. In 1869, Mumler faced a high-profile trial for fraud in Boston, but he was acquitted due to lack of evidence. Despite the legal victory, his career suffered a blow, and his reputation was forever tarnished. And so, many continue to doubt his spirit photography and refuse to acknowledge his saga as part of history. Number 18. The inflatable tanks and invisible soldiers of the World War. As they say, All is fair in love and war. Throughout history, mankind has started a number of wars that led to the loss of millions of innocent lives. But that doesn't mean nothing was done to minimize the loss. During the Second World War, the Allies used military deception to trick the Nazis and be the victors of the battle. In the early 1940s, as the Allies prepared for the D-Day landings in Normandy, they faced the daunting challenge of concealing their true intentions from the watchful eyes of the German military. This led to the development of an ingenious plan that involved creating convincing decoys to divert the enemy's attention. Inflatable tanks. These inflatable life-size replicas of tanks, trucks, and even artillery pieces were designed to look remarkably realistic from a distance. They were constructed with canvas and rubber and carefully painted to mimic the appearance of genuine military vehicles. Sound deception was also a critical component in this elaborate ruse. Recordings of tanks moving, soldiers talking, and vehicles in action were played at strategic locations near the dummy vehicles. This created the convincing auditory impression that a large military force was present. This confusion played a significant role in the success of the D-Day landings and subsequent operations. To this day, this fact still surprises quite a lot of people, and I must admit that I was surprised upon learning this for the first time, too. Number 17. First morning after Sweden changed driving on the right. On September 3, 1967, Sweden experienced a historic and chaotic transformation. In my opinion, this photo says it all. This picture shows the day Sweden changed from driving on the left-hand side of the road to driving on the right, a momentous shift known as Dagen H, or H-Day. Now you might think that doesn't really sound that bad, but just imagine driving on the highway and suddenly everything is inverted. What's supposed to be your lane is now the opposite one.
I wouldn't have went nowhere that day. I'd have just stayed home till they got it all figured and sorted out, bro. You crazy to drive on that day.
Before this was enacted, public awareness campaigns, advertisements, and educational materials flooded the media in the months leading up to Dagen H. Swedes were encouraged to practice driving on the right using specially designated days as some sort of trial run. On the day itself, though, everyone found themselves still trapped in a state of chaos. Once the switch was made, the roads were filled with bewildered drivers and pedestrians trying to navigate the new system. Fender benders and minor accidents were the norm for quite some time. We're not talking about several new drivers here. Everyone was getting used to the new system, but it was a necessary change. Not only did driving on the right make everything safer, but it also made it easier to cross and drive to neighboring countries that had already adopted a right drive system. Despite the initial pandemonium, Sweden gradually adapted to the new driving system. In the long run, this major transition paid off. Number 16. Shadow of a Hiroshima victim. August 6, 1945 marks one of the darkest days in human history, when the world witnessed the devastating power of atomic warfare. On that fateful morning, the city of Hiroshima, Japan became the target of the world's first atomic bomb. Codenamed Little Boy, many lives were lost, and many among those who survived had to bear living with deformities and other physical burdens caused by the radiation. However, if there is one piece of physical evidence that will remain unforgettable, it's an eerie silhouette left on concrete by the powerful explosion. This shadow was imprinted onto the steps of the Sumitomo Bank, not far from Ground Zero. The victim, whose identity remains unknown, went about their daily routine when the bomb detonated. Their body shielded a portion of the steps from the searing heat, creating a shadow that forever memorialized the tragic moment. Number 15. The Two-Headed Boy of Bengal. Although easily considered an intriguing case, the Two-Headed Boy of Bengal isn't as known in history. This boy, named Lalu, was born in the village of Mundal Gate, near Calcutta, India, in 1867. From birth, he possessed an extraordinary physical anomaly: 2 distinct heads joined on a single body.
Wow.
What's bizarre is that each head had its own distinctive personality. In a world before the internet and mass media, tales of such unusual individuals traveled slowly, but they traveled nonetheless. Lalu's condition resulted from conjoined twins who had not fully separated during embryonic development. The 2 heads, with distinct facial features and expressions, could blink, smile, and express emotions independently. Lulu had a single body with 2 arms and
I was wondering if the top head was operating off everything else that the bottom head is operating off of. The same heart, the same organs, everything else. I was wondering, like, why we never, I can't speak for y'all. Why did I've never heard of this story before.
2 legs capable of performing tasks. But the existence of 2 heads made movement harder. Despite his condition, Lulu was not exploited or treated as a curiosity by those who cared for him. He was well loved and protected by his family, who
As
did
it
their
should
best
be.
to ensure his comfort and well-being. Lulu died at the young age of 23, but he's still remembered in medical books, where his case remains among the most bizarre.
Wow.
Number 14. World War II gas masks for babies. The constant threat of chemical warfare made World War II a difficult time to live in. To protect their populations, governments took unprecedented measures, including the production of gas masks for people of all ages, especially the most vulnerable, babies. These miniature masks were created to shield infants from the deadly effects of chemical weapons. While their purpose was noble, seeing babies wearing these masks is deeply unsettling.
Yeah.
Just look at the stark contrast between the size of babies' heads and the masks they're wearing. The design of these baby gas masks was far from comforting. They consisted of a rubber face covering with a plastic window to allow parents to monitor their child's breathing. A small air pump was used to provide a constant supply of filtered air. On top of the rubber mask, there was a hood that enveloped the baby's head, covering them completely. Just imagine how scared the babies were. The masks obstructed their vision and made it difficult for them to hear or communicate. Strapped tightly to their tiny faces, it probably felt confined and scared. Number 13. The Great Depression. The Great Depression, a period that stretched from 1929 to the late 1930s, remains one of the most defining chapters in the economic history of the United States and the world. After the crash of the stock market, failing bank systems, and a weak economy, millions of people naturally lost their jobs in 1929. Millions of Americans saw their livelihood evaporate overnight as businesses shuttered, banks failed, and unemployment soared. Families lost their homes and savings, and only those who acquired immense wealth had the privilege of playing their cards to benefit in the economic downturn. Wealthy people had the money to manipulate the stock market and buy stocks at a meager price. Through this, they took advantage of the volatile pattern of stocks. Property values plummeted, and wealthy individuals had no problem hogging most real estate assets. Like the present, those affected by the crashed economy were the common folk. This photo completely captures the horrific situation at the time. This man was seen walking in the streets in the 1930s. I know 3 trades. I speak 3 languages, fought for 3 years, have 3 children, and no work for 3 months. But I only want 1 job. Today, his skills are undoubtedly sufficient to secure a job, but they may not have been as valuable during the turbulent times of the Great Depression. Number 12. Daredevil construction workers. The Empire State Building and its construction stand as iconic symbols. Yet today, the majority
Where's OSHA when you need them? Jesus Christ.
of the population remains unaware of the immense courage displayed by the workers who built it. Following the Great Depression in the early 1930s, the race was on to construct the tallest building in the world. The Empire State Building was designed to reach unprecedented heights, standing at 1,454 feet tall. Now imagine working on this giant structure without any modern safety gear, like harnesses or safety nets. Workers, often referred to as skywalkers, braved the dizzying heights without any protective measures. They moved
They didn't have no on-the-job insurance back then, fam. Ain't no way. Who gonna sign off on that?
along narrow steel beams, balancing on rafters, and often perched on open frameworks hundreds of feet above the ground. These people took the job knowing they had a lot of experience, but if I were them, I wouldn't risk my life standing on a structure over 1,000 feet. Number 11. Preserving Native American music. In the early 20th century, a remarkable woman named Frances Densmore took it upon herself to preserve the rich musical traditions of Native American tribes, a noble mission that is often overlooked. Frances Densmore was born in 1867 in Red Wing, Minnesota, and from an early age, she displayed a deep fascination with music and a strong desire to learn about different cultures. Her life's work would lead her to make invaluable contributions to the preservation of Native American music. Densmore began her career at a time when the recording and documentation of indigenous cultures were in their infancy. Armed with early recording equipment and a profound respect for the traditions of the Native American tribes, she set out to document their music, songs, and rituals. Over the course of several decades, Densmore tirelessly traveled across the United States, visiting numerous tribes and building relationships with Native American musicians and cultural experts. She recorded thousands of songs, many of which had never been documented. Her dedication to accurately capturing the music and traditions of these tribes was unparalleled. It's amazing how many incredible people stepped up, but it's heartbreaking that many are left unrecognized for their deeds. Number 10. Hair treatment or a death machine? The 1930s marked an era of innovation and progress in many aspects of life, including fashion and beauty. However, when it came to hair salon machines, what we now consider terrifying and bizarre contraptions were once the cutting-edge tools at the time. These contraptions often resembled a blend of medieval torture devices and futuristic helmets designed for the purpose of treating hair and achieving fashionable styles. Just take a look at this photo, and you'll be astounded by the peculiar contraption before you. It's difficult to imagine that this device, which appears to belong to a different era entirely, was actually used for hair treatments. One can't help but wonder how many women of that time found the courage to sit beneath these contraptions every day.
The lengths y'all go to look good, fam. This is a no-no. Somebody show up and wanting to connect all of that to you just to make your hair look good. You still sit down up under that, man. Y'all look crazy. I said it before, women are crazy, man.
The thought of undergoing treatment with such a machine might require a significant amount of convincing. Number 9. The wall that split families. You've probably read about the Berlin Wall in history books, but these photos weren't often published due to the heartbreaking things they reveal. The Berlin Wall, erected by the East German government, was intended to prevent the mass migration of East Germans to the more prosperous West. Families suddenly became divided by a concrete barrier, barbed wire, and heavily armed guards. Brothers and sisters, parents and children were separated by the wall, unable to visit or communicate with their loved ones on the other side. Estimates suggest that thousands of families were torn apart by the Berlin Wall. Some members managed to escape the wall through daring and dangerous means, while others remained trapped in the East. Communication was restricted, and family members were often left in unbearable uncertainty about the well-being and whereabouts of their loved ones. It was only in 1989, when political changes and grassroots movements led to the fall of the Berlin Wall, that families were finally reunited, often after years of separation. These photos are enough to show how harrowing the sudden implementation of the wall was to many families in the area. Number 8. The iron lung. Magnetic resonance imaging, or modern MRIs, allows doctors to get a visual reference for the body's internal structures. It's extremely helpful in diagnosis and other medical procedures, but it can be pretty terrifying for patients, especially claustrophobic ones. Imagine if your life depended on a machine similar to the MRI, and your body needs to be connected to it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year, indefinitely, until your lungs are capable of functioning properly again, which is highly unlikely. The iron lung, a mechanical respirator, was a life-saving device developed in the early 20th century to assist individuals with paralyzed or weakened respiratory muscles. While it was an essential medical advancement, being confined within an iron lung was a harrowing experience, both physically and emotionally. One of the most well-known cases of an individual who survived for an extended period using an iron lung was that of Paul Alexander. Born in 1927, Paul contracted polio at the age of 6, which left him paralyzed from the neck down and unable to breathe independently. In 1930, at the age of 12, he entered an iron lung, a machine that would become his lifeline for the next several decades. Inside an iron lung, a patient's entire body, except the head, remains enclosed in a cylindrical metal chamber. The device creates negative pressure, causing the chest to expand and contract, simulating natural breathing. Patients are provided with a mirror and often books or other entertainment to help pass the time. Can you say that living inside this machine really is living? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Number 7. First selfie. Most people take photographs of themselves or self-portraits nowadays. The internet now calls them selfies, which I think is an apt name. If our current world somehow collapses and our data remains, the new generation would have no problem checking out selfies and countless photographs of today's people on the net. But have you ever wondered who took the first quote-unquote selfie? Well, here it is. Robert Cornelius, an American chemist and photography enthusiast, took the pioneering selfie. In 1839, photography was still in its infancy, and the daguerreotype process had just been invented by Louis Daguerre in France. Cornelius, who was intrigued by this new medium, decided to experiment with it. On a sunny day in October 1839, Cornelius set up his crude camera equipment in the yard of his family's store in Philadelphia. This required him to remove the camera's lens cap, quickly run into the frame, and then replace the lid. This brief moment of self-exposure resulted in what we now recognize as the first photographic self-portrait, or selfie. Pretty cool, don't you think? Number 6. The Morrison Shelter. The Morrison Shelter was designed in 1941 by John Baker and named after Herbert Morrison, the British Home Secretary at the time. It was a versatile piece of wartime furniture, resembling a large rectangular dining table with a metal frame and wire mesh top. However,
you know what that reminds me of? Y'all ever seen those earthquake beds? Where it's like, soon as the ground starts shaking, the bed like puts you down inside of it and closes over top of you? That is exactly what this is. The stuff that's like a cage, and I don't like the earthquake bed either. They just both. I don't know if I could do it, and I'm not claustrophobic, but something about this just don't feel right.
A piece of furniture created for the safety of the home's occupants. When not in use as a regular table, families could quickly transform the Morrison Shelter into an air raid shelter. It featured fold-down sides and ends, which could be raised and secured, creating a protective cage-like structure. The wire mesh top was strong enough to withstand the impact of falling debris and offered a safe space for occupants to take cover during air raids. One by one, these photographs show us just how peaceful of a life we live compared to our grandparents. Number 5.
True.
McDonald's opening in Moscow, 1990. Almost everyone today has tried eating at McDonald's at least once, unless they're from a country that doesn't have a McDonald's, which in today's day and age is quite rare. Food is something that people throughout history went crazy for, particularly fast food. This photo was captured in Moscow, specifically on January 31, 1990. A staggering 38,000 customers waited in hours-long lines just to get their hands on a McDonald's meal. Inside the restaurant, the scene was equally chaotic. The McDonald's staff worked tirelessly to meet the overwhelming demand. Would you have waited in line if you were alive back then? Why?
No.
Or why not? Personally, I wouldn't have. But understandably, many people at the time wanted to be among the first to have a bite of the food McDonald's offered. But I sure do hope that they thought it was worth the wait. Number 4.
They probably ran out of meat a long time ago.
Or the face of war. There are many documented cases of soldiers whose faces changed due to the physical and psychological stresses of war. The 2 world wars took the lives of many soldiers and changed the lives of those who survived forever. Soldiers under extreme stress may exhibit psychosomatic symptoms, which can manifest physically. Many also experienced post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, a recognized mental health condition that can develop in response to traumatic experiences, including combat. While it primarily affects mental health, the physical toll of PTSD can be significant, leading to changes in appearance due to stress, anxiety, and the associated psychological response. Just look at how much the face of this Soviet soldier changed. It's noticeable just how much he had seen on the battlefield. You can see how his face looks like it had seen hell on earth. And judging by what's written in history books, this might as well be the truth. Number 3. Woman arrested for a bathing suit. Annette Kellerman, an Australian swimmer, actress, and pioneer of women's aquatic sports, made waves in the early 20th century for her remarkable achievements in swimming and her contributions to changing the landscape of women's fashion. However, one part of her life is often omitted in history books. Born in 1886 in Sydney, Australia, Annette Kellerman was a prodigious swimmer from a young age. She honed her skills, and by her teenage years, she had become a competitive swimmer of international acclaim. Her talents extended beyond the pool. She was also a successful vaudeville performer, and eventually transitioned into the emerging medium of film. In the early 1900s, women's swimwear was highly restrictive, typically consisting of heavy full-body garments that concealed the female form. Kellerman, however, had a different vision. She believed that swimwear should be functional, allowing for freedom of movement in the water. In 1907, she designed a form-fitting one-piece swimsuit, a revolutionary departure from the traditional swimsuits of the era. In 1907, while visiting the United States, Kellerman faced a pivotal moment in her career and the history of women's swimwear. She decided to test her new swimwear design at Revere Beach near Boston, Massachusetts. However, her choice of attire did not conform to the conservative standards of the time. In today's time, wearing something like this is considered normal, isn't it? But let's just say that people in the 1900s were incredibly modest. Now you're probably thinking, what did women at the time wear? Well, they wore bathing dresses and swimwear that didn't reveal much of their legs or their arms. Number 2. Coal miners in a tight spot. The dire conditions of coal miners in Belgium during the 1920s were characterized by grueling labor, harsh working conditions, and long periods spent underground. This photo is enough to show just how harrowing the workers' situations were. These miners faced numerous challenges, including the cramped and outdated mine elevators, which often required them to spend extended periods underground without respite. All that scarcity, fear, and hard work for little salary.
See, this is why I don't never complain about work. So photos like this remind you, put you back in your place to be like, man, you don't even know how good you have it. Like, imagine what they had to deal with and go through back then. But they didn't care. They sucked it up and went on ahead and did it for their families and for themselves. You know what I'm saying? They got it done. So for me, I can't complain.
That was barely enough to get their families to eat. Each day, these people went to work with one of their feet dangling into their deathbeds. The mine elevators used in this era were often outdated and cramped, far inferior to the ones we have today. These elevators were designed to transport miners and equipment to and from the coal seams. The limited space and capacity of these elevators meant that miners were frequently packed tightly together during their descent and ascent into and out of the mines. This goes to show just how harrowing life back then was. And now it's time for today's topic. This picture is among the rare photos not appropriate for history books. This picture is a unique glimpse into a specific period of American history. It shows a woman dressed in Native American clothing. However, this one's just not for the books. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a fascination with Native American culture in the United States. There have allegedly been a lot of people who tried to get into it, which led to countless photos in circulation showing inappropriate photos that many claim are historical. That's why when you see a photo, you really have to verify the truth behind it. Number 1. Anti-British propaganda. This is something you definitely won't see in history books. What you're looking at might look like something captured in the 21st century, but this is actually anti-British propaganda created by the Japanese. You see, World War II witnessed the widespread use of propaganda by various nations, each with its own objectives and strategies. The Japanese government, in its bid to expand its influence in Asia and the Pacific, employed anti-British propaganda as part of its propaganda campaigns. There are a lot of reasons. For one, Japan aimed to fracture the unity of the Allied forces, of which Britain was a key member, by sowing discord and distrust among the Allies, particularly between Britain and the United States. Japan hoped to weaken the international coalition against its expansionist agenda. What's more, propaganda served as a tool for rallying domestic support. By portraying Britain as a symbol of colonial oppression and injustice, the Japanese government aimed to mobilize its population behind the war effort, framing it as a just struggle against Western imperialism. Again, I can't help but feel thankful that we now live in a more peaceful time. This goes to show that there's a lot in history that was left untold.